My name is Russell, and at 68 years old, I never imagined my own son would treat me like a tenant. After losing my wife and selling our home of 40 years, Derek convinced me to move in with his family to save for retirement. I was grateful for the opportunity to be closer to my grandchildren and thought we would support each other as family should. Then came that conversation about contributing to household expenses, which turned my world upside down. If you have ever had family take advantage of your generosity, let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe and stay for a story about choosing dignity over manipulation. Before everything fell apart, I had what most would consider a simple but fulfilling life. My wife Sarah and I had been married for 40 years when cancer took her 2 years ago. We had built our life together in a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, paid off completely 20 years into our marriage. Sarah had been a kindergarten teacher, and I worked as a carpenter my entire life. We never had much extra, but we saved carefully for retirement and lived within our means. Sarah and I had only one child, our son Derek. I still remember teaching him how to use his first hammer when he was just 6 years old. He would follow me around my workshop in the garage, eyes wide with wonder as I built bookshelves, cabinets, and once, a beautiful rocking chair for Sarah. Derek showed real talent with his hands back then. By 12, he could make a decent birdhouse all on his own. Those were golden days, working side by side, the smell of sawdust in the air, talking about school, friends, and dreams. As Derek grew older, his interests changed. He became fascinated with business and money in high school, always talking about investments and the stock market instead of craftsmanship. I supported his interests, even though they were different from mine. He went to college for finance, met his wife Amanda there, and eventually settled into a career as a banking executive. Success came quickly for him, and I was proud, even if I sometimes felt we had less and less in common. After Sarah passed, the house felt enormous and empty. I managed for almost 2 years on my own, but the silence was deafening. I would talk to Sarah sometimes, sitting in her rocking chair, telling her about my day or asking what she thought about the neighbor's new fence. Grief has a way of making you do strange things, but it brought me comfort. It was during one of our regular Sunday dinners at Derek and Amanda's house that they first suggested I sell my house and move in with them. "Dad, have you thought about downsizing?" Derek asked while cutting into his steak. "That house is way too big for just you, and the maintenance must be getting harder." I shrugged. "I manage fine. The house keeps me busy." Amanda, always practical, jumped in. "Russell, you should be thinking about your retirement. Property taxes keep going up, and that money could be working for you instead. Plus," Derek added with a smile toward his kids, "Emma and Jason would love having their grandpa around more, right guys?" Emma, 14 and usually glued to her phone, actually looked up and nodded. "That would be cool, Grandpa. You could help me with my woodshop class." That moment warmed my heart. Jason, 12 and full of energy, bounced in his seat. "And you could come to my baseball games." The idea began to take root. Derek kept bringing it up over the next few months, talking about real estate markets being hot and how I could invest the proceeds from my house sale to secure my future. "You worked hard your whole life, Dad. Now let that money work for you," he would say. I was hesitant to leave the home where Sarah and I had built our lives together. Every corner held memories. The mark on the kitchen doorframe where we measured Derek's height growing up, the small dent in the living room wall from when Sarah tried to move the sofa by herself, the garden she had lovingly tended, where I still grew her favorite tomatoes. Letting go of these things felt like letting go of pieces of her. But Derek was persistent, and I began to see the wisdom in his suggestion. The house was worth much more than what we had paid for it decades ago. A real estate agent came by and estimated I could get around $420,000 for it. That seemed like an enormous sum to me. Plus, the idea of being around my grandchildren daily was appealing. Since Sarah died, loneliness had become my constant companion. Selling the house was harder emotionally than I had anticipated. Neighbors I had known for decades stopped by to say goodbye. The Andersons from across the street brought a casserole and memories of block parties from the 80s. Tom Garcia, who had moved in next door 25 years ago, helped me pack up my workshop, and reminisced about the time I helped him build a treehouse for his kids, who were now adults with children of their own. The hardest part was packing Sarah's things. I had kept most of them untouched, her closet still full of dresses she would never wear again. With the help of Maggie, Sarah's sister, I sorted through everything, donating most items but keeping the special ones. Her wedding ring, the perfume bottle still half full on her dresser, the handwritten recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. By the time the moving truck arrived, I had downsized dramatically, keeping only what would fit in the room Derek had prepared for me in their basement. It was a space about 15 feet by 20 feet, with a small bathroom attached. Derek had painted it a warm beige color and put in a new carpet. There was a double bed, a dresser, a small desk, and a comfortable armchair by the window that looked out into the backyard. Derek and Amanda lived in an upscale neighborhood about 30 minutes from my old house. Their home was impressive, a 2-story colonial with a 3-car garage, manicured lawn, and a backyard pool. They had 2 luxury cars in the driveway, and a lifestyle that showed Derek's success in the financial world. Amanda worked as a financial advisor, so between the two of them, they seemed to be doing very well. The first few weeks were pleasant. We ate dinner together almost every night as a family. I helped Emma with a school project for her woodshop class, building a small jewelry box that earned her an A. I attended Jason's baseball games and cheered from the bleachers. In the mornings, I would make breakfast for the kids before school while Derek and Amanda got ready for work. It felt good to be useful, to be part of a family unit again. Amanda was always polite, if a bit distant. She was clearly particular about her home, and I tried to respect that. I kept my things contained to my room and the shared family spaces when invited. Derek seemed happy to have me there, often stopping by my room after work to chat for a few minutes about his day. The grandchildren were the true joy. Jason would burst into my room without knocking, eager to show me a new video game or trick he had learned. Emma was more reserved, but would seek me out for advice or just to sit quietly while I worked on small woodworking projects I could manage at my desk. I began to hope that this new chapter of my life might be even better than I had imagined. I was grateful to Derek for suggesting the move and looked forward to years of family connection ahead. Around the 2-month mark, I began to notice subtle shifts in the household dynamics. The first change was in the morning routine. Amanda, who usually left for work after the kids went to school, started leaving earlier, often before I even came upstairs for breakfast. Derek, who had typically joined us for coffee before heading out, now rushed through his morning, barely having time for more than a quick hello. Family dinners became less frequent. Working late, Derek would text, or taking clients out tonight. Amanda often had evening meetings with her financial planning clients. I still made dinner for the kids, but the family meals that had been so pleasant during those first weeks dwindled to maybe once or twice a week. I also noticed Derek and Amanda having hushed conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered a room. Once, I was coming up from the basement and overheard Amanda saying, "But we discussed this before he moved in," with a tense edge to her voice. Derek replied something too low for me to hear clearly, but I caught the phrase "my father" and "be patient." The grandchildren still sought me out, but even that began to change. Jason, who had been bursting into my room regularly, now knocked and asked, "Are you busy, Grandpa?" with a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Emma still came to sit with me, but mentioned once that her mother had asked her not to bother Grandpa too much. I tried to make myself useful around the house, fixing a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and replacing some worn weather stripping on the back door. But when I mentioned to Derek that I had noticed the deck needed some boards replaced, he quickly said, "Don't worry about it, Dad. We have people we call for that kind of thing." The first truly uncomfortable conversation happened about 10 weeks after I moved in. Derek came to my room one evening, closing the door behind him, which was unusual. "How are you settling in, Dad?" he asked, sitting on the edge of my bed while I sat in my armchair. "Just fine," I said, "though I feel like I see less of everyone these days." Derek nodded, looking down at his hands. "Work gets busy this time of year." After a pause, he added, "So, how did you end up investing the proceeds from the house sale?" The question took me by surprise. We had not discussed the specifics of my finances since I moved in. "Well, Most of it is in a conservative investment portfolio. My financial advisor suggested keeping it primarily for retirement and potential medical expenses down the road. Derek's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. That makes sense, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Housing markets are really expensive these days. Amanda and I have this big mortgage, and property taxes in this neighborhood are insane. I sensed where this might be heading and offered I would be happy to contribute to groceries and utilities. I should have offered sooner. That would be helpful, Derek said quickly. Maybe we can figure out a fair amount. After he left, I sat thinking about the conversation. It seemed reasonable that I should contribute to household expenses, but something about Derek's approach left me uneasy. Why bring up my house sale proceeds? And why the emphasis on their expensive mortgage? Over the next few weeks, I became increasingly aware of being an outsider in the household. I would come upstairs to find the family eating breakfast without having called me. Plans were made for weekend activities without including me. Once, I came into the living room where everyone was watching a movie, and while no one asked me to leave, no one moved to make space for me either. I began spending more time in my basement room, emerging mainly for meals or when the grandchildren sought me out. I started taking long walks around the neighborhood during the day, partly for exercise and partly to give everyone their space. During one of these walks, I ran into a neighbor who assumed I was visiting and seemed surprised to learn I lived there. "Oh, I had no idea Derek had his father living with them," she said. "That must be so nice for everyone." "Yes," I replied, not wanting to say more. One evening, I accidentally overheard an argument between Derek and Amanda. I had gone up to the kitchen for a glass of water, thinking everyone was asleep, when I heard their raised voices from their bedroom, which was directly above the kitchen. "We never agreed to support his father indefinitely," Amanda said, her voice clearly upset. "The plan was that he would contribute." "He is my father," Derek responded. "What was I supposed to do? Leave him alone in that big house? You were the one who pushed him to sell it," Amanda shot back. "I thought we had an understanding about the financial arrangement." Their voices lowered then, and I quietly returned to my room, my water forgotten. The conversation confirmed my growing suspicion that Derek and Amanda had different expectations about my living with them than what had been communicated to me. The following week, Derek began making casual comments about his friends whose parents lived with them. "Jim's mother pays them rent, basically like a tenant," he mentioned during a rare family dinner. "And Steve's parents actually bought the house for them, then moved into the in-law suite. Pretty sweet arrangement." Amanda would nod vigorously at these comments, adding things like, "That makes so much sense from a financial planning perspective. Supporting 3 generations under one roof requires coordination." I tried to maintain a positive outlook, focusing on my relationship with my grandchildren. Emma was preparing for her school's talent show, and I helped her build props for her act. Jason had a big baseball tournament coming up, and I never missed a game. But even these interactions began to feel strained, with Emma mentioning that her mother had asked if she was spending too much time in the basement. My internal conflict grew daily. I loved being close to my grandchildren, but I was beginning to feel like an unwelcome guest rather than family. I missed my old home, my workshop, my neighbors. I missed the freedom of having my own space where I didn't feel like I was intruding just by existing. What troubled me most was watching my relationship with Derek deteriorate. The son who had once followed me around my workshop, eager to learn and spend time together, now seemed to view me primarily as a financial consideration. Had this always been beneath the surface, or had something changed? I spent many nights lying awake, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. I considered looking for my own apartment, but the thought of starting over at 68, after selling the home where I had spent my adult life, was daunting. Plus, I kept hoping that the situation would improve, that Derek and I would find our way back to the warmth we once shared. Maybe I just needed to be more explicit about contributing financially to ease the tension. With that in mind, I decided to broach the subject myself, rather than waiting for another uncomfortable interaction. I caught Derek one Saturday morning as he was getting coffee. "I have been thinking," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "I should be contributing more to the household. What would be a fair amount for utilities and groceries? Derek looked surprised, then relieved. Actually, Dad, Amanda and I have been talking about that. Let's sit down tomorrow evening and work out something that makes sense for everyone. The way he said it sounded promising, but the knot in my stomach only grew tighter. The following evening, after the grandchildren had gone up to their rooms to do homework, Derek called me into the dining room. He and Amanda sat at the table with several papers spread out in front of them. The formal setup immediately put me on edge. "Have a seat, Dad," Derek said, his voice carrying the same tone he probably used in business meetings. "Amanda and I want to discuss the financial arrangement now that you have been living with us for a few months." I sat down across from them, feeling strangely like I was at a job interview rather than a family discussion. Amanda had her hair pulled back severely and wore the same expression she had in the professional headshot displayed in her home office. "As you know," Derek continued, "we have significant expenses. Our mortgage on this house is substantial. The kids are in private school, which costs $25,000 per year for each of them. We have property taxes, maintenance costs, utilities that have gone up since you moved in, and additional food expenses." Amanda slid a spreadsheet across the table toward me. "I have broken down the household expenses," she said in her client presentation voice. "As you can see, the total monthly cost for this household is approximately $12,000. I glanced at the spreadsheet, which was meticulously organized into categories like mortgage, utilities, groceries, household maintenance, and various services they employed like lawn care and house cleaning. "Now, we have been thinking about what would be a fair contribution," Derek said, exchanging a glance with Amanda. "Given the value of the space you are occupying, comparable rental rates in this area, and your share of utilities and food, we think $1,500 per month would be reasonable." I stared at them, not fully comprehending at first. $1,500 per month? As rent? "As your contribution to the household," Amanda corrected smoothly, "plus a percentage of the utilities, which would vary month to month but probably average around $200. The shock must have shown on my face because Derek quickly added, "This is actually below market value for what you would pay for an apartment in this area, and you get the benefits of being with family." I sat back in my chair, trying to process what was happening. This was not at all what I had expected when I offered to contribute to groceries and utilities. They were treating me like a tenant, not family. "I sold my home because you suggested it would be better for my retirement," I said slowly, keeping my voice level despite the growing hurt and anger. "You never mentioned that I would be paying rent to live with you." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "We talked about you contributing, Dad." "Contributing, yes. Not paying $1,500 in rent plus utilities. That would be over half of my monthly retirement income." Amanda straightened the papers in front of her. "Well, Russell, retirement planning means making wise financial decisions. The proceeds from your house sale should be generating investment income. Combined with your Social Security and pension, this contribution should be manageable." I looked at my son, searching for some recognition of how inappropriate this felt. "Derek, when you suggested I sell my house and move in with you, was this your plan all along?" Derek glanced at Amanda before responding. "We assumed you would contribute significantly. After all, you received over $400,000 from your house sale, and there it was. The real issue was not about fair contribution to the household. They had expected to benefit from my house sale. Perhaps they had assumed I would give them a large portion of the proceeds, or that I would pay for renovations to their home, or even that I would cover a significant portion of their mortgage. "Let me be clear," I said, feeling a strange calm descend over me. "I sold my house, which was paid off, to invest that money for my future needs. At my age, I have to consider potential medical expenses, long-term care insurance, and having enough to live on for what could be another 20 years or more. I never agreed to pay you rent." Derek's expression hardened. "Dad, if you live in someone's house, you have to pay. That's how the world works." "Is that how family works too?" I asked quietly. "Would you charge Emma rent when she turns 18? "That's different," Derek said dismissively. "She's our child, and you are my child," I replied. "When you needed money for college, did I charge you interest? When you and Amanda were saving for your first house and lived with us for 8 months, did we charge you rent?" Amanda interjected. That was a different situation entirely. We were just starting out, and I am near the end of my earning years, I countered. I offered to contribute to groceries and utilities, which is reasonable. But $1,500 in rent plus utilities is not contribution. That's exploitation. The word hung in the air between us. Derek's face flushed with anger. If that's how you see it, he said coldly, perhaps this arrangement is not going to work. We have our financial obligations, and if you can't respect that, then maybe you should look for other accommodations. I felt as if I had been slapped. My own son was essentially threatening to evict me if I didn't pay what he demanded. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking slightly. I will think about what you have said, I managed to reply, then walked back to my basement room and closed the door. That night was one of the longest of my life. I sat in my armchair staring at nothing, replaying the conversation and everything that had led up to it. Had I misunderstood Derek's intentions from the beginning? Had I been naive to think that his invitation was motivated by family caring rather than financial calculation? The next morning, I avoided the kitchen until I was sure everyone had left for work and school. I made myself a simple breakfast and sat alone at the kitchen table, considering my options. I could pay what they asked, draining my monthly income and potentially endangering my long-term financial security. I could try to negotiate a lower amount, though the previous night's conversation gave me little hope for that. Or I could leave, starting over again at 68. None of the options seemed good. Paying would mean accepting a fundamentally altered relationship with my son, one based on financial transaction rather than family bonds. Leaving would mean giving up daily contact with my grandchildren, who were innocent in all this. When Derek came home that evening, he and Amanda were noticeably cold, offering only brief acknowledgments when I said hello. Dinner was a silent affair, with the grandchildren picking up on the tension and saying little. Afterward, I tried to talk to Derek alone, but he said he had work to do and disappeared into his home office. The silent treatment continued for 3 days. It was as if I had become invisible in the house, acknowledged only when absolutely necessary. The grandchildren still spoke to me but seemed confused and uncomfortable about the obvious tension between the adults. On the 4th day after the confrontation, I found an envelope slipped under my door when I returned from a walk. Inside was a formal typed document titled Rental Agreement. It outlined the terms Derek and Amanda had presented at the dinner, along with additional stipulations about quiet hours, use of common areas, and even a security deposit. There was a space at the bottom for my signature. It was the formality of it, the complete stripping away of any pretense that this was a family arrangement, that finally broke me. I sat on the edge of my bed and, for the first time since Sarah died, wept openly, not just for this betrayal, but for all the losses that had led me here. My wife, my home, and now, it seemed, my relationship with my son. That night, alone in my basement room, I hit the lowest emotional point since Sarah's death. The formal rental agreement lay on my desk, a tangible symbol of how my son now viewed me, not as his father but as a potential source of income, a tenant rather than family. Every time I looked at it, a fresh wave of hurt washed over me. I found myself questioning everything about my relationship with Derek and my role as a parent. Where had I gone wrong? Had I somehow failed to instill the values of family loyalty and support that my parents had taught me? I thought back to Derek's childhood, searching for signs I might have missed. Moments where I had inadvertently taught him that relationships were transactional rather than based on love and mutual support. There had been struggles, of course. What family doesn't have them? When Derek was in high school, we had arguments about his priorities, about his growing materialism. I remembered him being embarrassed by our modest home when his wealthier friends came over. Was that when the seeds were planted? This idea that financial success was the measure of a person's worth? I pulled out my wallet and found the worn photograph I always carried. One of the 3 of us, Derek at about 10 years old, grinning between Sarah and me at a lakeside picnic. His eyes shone with uncomplicated happiness, his arm thrown carelessly around my waist. What had happened to that boy who once looked at me with such open love and admiration? The grief was overwhelming, not just for my current situation, but for Sarah not being here to help navigate this. She had always been the bridge between Derek and me when communications broke down, the translator of feelings when words failed. What would she think of what our son was doing now? The thought of her disappointment in him brought fresh pain. I was seized with a sudden fear about my future. At 68, starting over seemed daunting. I had some savings, yes, and the proceeds from the house sale, but the security I had counted on, the family support in my later years, now seemed like a cruel illusion. Would I end up alone? Would health problems leave me vulnerable and isolated? The anxiety kept me awake until the early hours of the morning. Around midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs and the murmur of voices. Unable to sleep anyway, I quietly went up to get some water, moving carefully to avoid creaking steps. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Emma's voice from the family room. Why is not Grandpa at dinner anymore? Is he mad at us? I paused in the hallway, out of sight but able to hear Derek's response. No, honey. Grandpa is just having trouble adjusting to living here. Sometimes older people find change difficult. The mischaracterization stung sharply. I was not the one struggling to adapt. I had been making every effort to fit into their lives, to be helpful without being intrusive, to respect their home and routines. To hear Derek frame the tension as my failure to adapt, rather than his betrayal of what family should mean, was another wound on top of so many. Is he going to move out? Emma asked, her voice small and worried. I don't know, Derek replied after a pause. That would be his decision. But if he does, you'll still see him. But how often? I wondered. Once a month for a supervised visit? On holidays when obligation demanded it? The thought of being reduced to an occasional presence in my grandchildren's lives was almost unbearable. I returned to my room without the water, my throat too tight with emotion to swallow anyway. Sleep continued to elude me as I turned over possibilities in my mind, each seeming worse than the last. Pay the exorbitant rent and accept my diminished place in the family. Leave and lose daily connection with my grandchildren. There seemed no good path forward. The next morning, when everyone had left again, I found myself drawn to the few boxes of personal mementos I had kept from my old home. Among them was a small wooden box I had made for Sarah on our 30th anniversary. Inside were letters she had written me over the years, cards, small tokens of our life together. I pulled out one letter she had written during a particularly difficult period when Derek was in college and had temporarily dropped out, arguing with me about his future plans. Sarah had been the mediator then too. Remember, Russell, she had written, that loving someone means respecting their choices even when you disagree, but it also means never letting anyone diminish your worth, not even our son. You have wisdom he hasn't earned yet. Stand firm in what you know to be right. Sarah's words from the past seemed to speak directly to my current situation. She had always been my moral compass when I felt lost. What would she advise now? I could almost hear her voice. Never let anyone diminish your worth. That same afternoon, the final straw came in the form of a text message from Derek. Have you had a chance to review the rental agreement? We'll need it signed by the end of the week. No inquiry about how I was feeling. No acknowledgement of how hurtful the situation was. Just a business deadline, as if I were indeed nothing more than a tenant who had fallen behind on paperwork. I sat at my small desk, the rental agreement before me, Sarah's letter beside it, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion began to transform into something clearer, more resolute. I thought of my own parents, how they had aged with dignity, how my father had remained strong and self-reliant until his final days. I remembered the respect with which we had treated them, the care we took to preserve their autonomy and self-respect. What lesson would I be teaching my grandchildren if I accepted this arrangement? That family relationships can be bought and sold, that their father could treat me this way, and by extension, that they could treat him this way when he aged. No, I would not be part of establishing such a precedent. In that moment, I made my decision. I would not sign the rental agreement. I would not pay $1,500 a month to be treated as less than family in my own son's home. I would not allow my worth to be diminished to a monthly payment. It was time to take control of my situation, instead of allowing myself to be a victim of it. The path forward suddenly became clear. It would be difficult, painful even, but it was the only way to preserve my self-respect and, perhaps someday, rebuild a healthier relationship with Derek and his family. With that decision made, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, the man who had faced challenges before and overcome them, the carpenter who knew how to build something solid even when starting with broken pieces. The next morning, with a clarity I hadn't felt in months, I began to make plans. My first call was to my friend Frank, a fellow carpenter I had worked alongside for over 30 years before we both retired. Frank had been trying to get me to come visit since I moved out of my old neighborhood, and I had been putting him off, thinking I needed to establish my new life with Derek's family first. "Russell, good to hear your voice," Frank boomed through the phone. "How's life with the grandkids?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Not what I expected, Frank. In fact, I need to make a change, and I could use your help." As I explained the situation, Frank's initial shock gave way to indignation on my behalf. "They want to charge you how much? Your own son? After you sold your house on his advice?" $1,500 a month plus utilities," I confirmed, and they gave me a formal rental agreement to sign. Frank let out a low whistle. "That's cold, Russell. What are you thinking of doing?" "I need to find my own place. Something small, affordable, where I can be independent." Frank was silent for a moment, then said, "You know, the apartment next to mine just became available. It's in that senior living community I told you about. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe, and they maintain everything. And it's about half what Derek wants to charge you." The coincidence seemed almost too perfect. "Is it still available? Let me call the office right now. Don't go signing anything with Derek. I'll get back to you." Within an hour, Frank had arranged for me to see the apartment the next day. I told Derek and Amanda I had a doctor's appointment, not wanting to reveal my plans until they were certain. The apartment was in a modest but well-maintained complex, specifically for seniors. It was a one-bedroom unit on the ground floor, about 700 square feet. The living area was bright with large windows, the kitchen small but functional, and the bedroom could comfortably fit my bed and dresser. A sliding glass door in the living room opened onto a small patio with enough space for a couple of chairs and perhaps some potted plants. The best feature, though, was the community center at the heart of the complex. It included a workshop where residents could use tools for small projects, a garden area where some grew vegetables, and a common room where various activities were held. The monthly rent was $800, utilities included. "It's not the Ritz," Frank said as we walked around, "but it's a good place. Friendly people, mostly retirees like us. And it's a 10-minute drive from my daughter's house, so I see my grandkids all the time." That last point convinced me. I filled out the application on the spot, using the address of Frank's apartment as my current residence. I paid the application fee and the first month's rent from my savings account, arranging for the lease to begin in 1 week. My next stop was a small storage facility, where I rented a unit to temporarily hold the belongings I would take with me. Then I visited a bank in a different branch from the one Derek and I shared, and opened a new account, transferring a portion of my funds there. Over the next few days, I carefully executed my plan. When Derek and Amanda were at work and the kids at school, I made several trips to my storage unit with boxes of personal belongings, careful to take only what was undeniably mine, and nothing that would be immediately noticed. My winter clothes, books I had kept, the box of Sarah's mementos, my small collection of woodworking tools that had fit in the basement. In between these preparations, I spent as much time with my grandchildren as they would allow. I helped Jason practice pitching in the backyard. I listened to Emma play the piece she was preparing for her piano recital. I didn't mention that I would be leaving soon. That conversation needed to happen differently, and I wasn't ready yet. Frank helped me acquire some basic furniture for the new apartment, secondhand but in good condition. A small dining table with 2 chairs, a comfortable recliner for the living room, a television stand. Bit by bit, the apartment began to take shape as a place where I could start over. The night before my planned departure, I sat down at the desk in my basement room and wrote a letter. I took my time with it, wanting to be clear but not cruel, honest but not vindictive. "Dear Derek and Amanda," I began. By the time you read this, I will have moved out. I cannot in good conscience sign the rental agreement you presented. Living with family should be based on mutual care and respect, not financial transaction. The terms you proposed would significantly impact my financial security and fundamentally change our relationship from family to landlord-tenant. I want you to know that I harbor no ill will. I understand that you have financial responsibilities and concerns, but I need to preserve my dignity and independence, as well as model for Emma and Jason what healthy family relationships should look like. I have left a check for $750 to cover my share of expenses for this month. This amount reflects what I believe is a fair contribution for the time I have been here. I will always love you, Derek. You are my son, and nothing can change that. And I will always love Emma and Jason. I have included my new address and phone number at the bottom of this letter for them, so they can reach out to me directly. I hope to remain an active part of their lives, even though I can no longer live in your home under the terms you proposed. This decision is not made out of anger or spite, but out of self-respect and the need to maintain my financial security as I age. I hope that in time, you will understand. With love, Dad. I sealed the letter in an envelope along with a check and the key to Derek's house that he had given me when I moved in. I placed this on top of the unsigned rental agreement on my desk where it would be easily found. The following day, I waited until everyone had left for work and school. Frank arrived with his pickup truck, and we loaded the last few items I had kept in my room: a suitcase with clothes, my pillow, and a favorite blanket Sarah had made, the desk lamp I had constructed from oak decades ago. As I took a final look around the basement room that had been my home for the past few months, I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness at what had been lost, regret that things had come to this point, but also, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. I was taking control of my life again, refusing to be defined by my son's diminished view of me. I locked the front door behind me, leaving my key inside as mentioned in my letter. As Frank drove us away from Derek's house, I didn't look back. Looking forward was the only way now. We spent the day setting up my new apartment. Frank's wife, Linda, came by with homemade curtains for the windows and a casserole for dinner. By evening, the small space was beginning to feel like somewhere I could call home. It wasn't the house I had shared with Sarah, and it wasn't the family environment I had hoped for with Derek, but it was mine, a place where my dignity remained intact. That night, alone in my new apartment, I turned off my cell phone. I wasn't ready yet for the reaction I knew would come when Derek and Amanda found my letter. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with that. Tonight, I needed rest and the space to begin healing. The next morning, I woke early in my new apartment. The silence felt different from the silence in Derek's basement. Somehow less oppressive, more peaceful. I made coffee in the small kitchen and sat on my patio watching the sun rise, feeling a tentative sense of new beginning. Around 10 o'clock, I finally turned on my cell phone. Immediately, it began buzzing with notification after notification. 35 missed calls, 22 voicemails, 47 text messages. Most were from Derek, with a significant number from Amanda as well. I took a deep breath and began listening to the voicemails, starting with the earliest. The first few were angry, Derek's voice tight with contained fury. "Dad, what is this? Call me immediately." And then, "You can't just leave like this. We need to talk." Amanda's messages were more controlled, but equally displeased. "Russell, this is extremely inconsiderate. Derek is very upset." As the voicemails progressed, the tone changed. Anger gave way to confusion, then to what sounded like panic. "Dad, please call me back. I'm worried about you." And later, "At least let me know you're safe. This isn't like you." The text messages followed a similar pattern. Initial outrage, accusations that I had overreacted, claims that I had misunderstood their intentions, then gradually shifting to concern and attempts at reconciliation. The final text, sent just an hour ago, read, "Dad, please, whatever you think happened, we can work it out. Just tell me where you are." I set the phone down, feeling emotionally drained just from witnessing their reactions. I had expected anger, perhaps even relief that they wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. The apparent concern was unexpected and, I had to admit, somewhat gratifying. At least Derek cared enough to be worried. I was contemplating how to respond when my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Derek or Amanda, but a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Russell? This is Margaret, Amanda's mother." I was surprised. I had met Amanda's parents only a handful of times at family events, and we had never been close. "Margaret, how did you get my number?" "From Amanda, of course." "Russell, what on earth is going on? Derek and Amanda are beside themselves. They say you disappeared without warning." "I left a letter explaining everything," I replied, keeping my voice level. "And I left a check for this month's expenses." "Well, they're very upset. Amanda says Derek hasn't been able to focus at work. They're worried about you." "I'm fine, Margaret. I found my own place." "But why? They offered you a home with them." I sighed. "They offered me a rental agreement with terms that would have depleted my savings and treated me like a tenant rather than family. I made a different choice." There was a pause. Then Margaret said, "I see. Well, I told Amanda that $1,500 seemed steep, but she said it was market rate. So they had discussed this with her family too. Somehow that made it worse, knowing that others had been consulted about what to charge me while I remained in the dark until confronted with their demands. "Please tell Derek I'm safe and well," I said, not wanting to be pulled into a longer discussion with Margaret. "I'll be in touch with him directly when I'm ready." After hanging up, I decided I needed to address the situation with Derek, if only to put a stop to the barrage of messages. I composed a brief text. "I am safe and well in my new apartment. I need some time to process everything. Please respect that. I will reach out when I'm ready to talk. Love, Dad." Almost immediately, the reply came. "Where are you? What apartment? We need to talk face to face." I didn't respond. Setting boundaries was new territory for me, especially with my son, but I knew I needed this space to maintain my resolve and protect my emotional well-being. Later that afternoon, my phone rang with another unfamiliar number. This time, it was Emma calling from a friend's phone. "Grandpa, are you okay? Dad is really upset." Hearing her voice brought both joy and pain. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just needed to find my own place. Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" Her voice caught, and I could tell she was trying not to cry. "I'm sorry about that, Emma. I didn't handle it well. But I haven't gone far, and this isn't goodbye. We'll still see each other. Dad said you got mad about money." I chose my words carefully. "Your dad and I have different ideas about family living arrangements, but that's between him and me. It doesn't change how much I love you and Jason. Can we visit you?" "Of course. Once I'm settled, I'll make arrangements with your parents. Maybe next weekend?" That seemed to reassure her. We talked for a few more minutes about her upcoming piano recital and a science project she was working on. When we hung up, I felt both heartened by the connection and saddened by the circumstances. The next day, Frank invited me to dinner at his apartment. It was good to have the distraction of normal social interaction, to talk about things other than my family situation. Frank and Linda were careful not to pry, though I could tell they were curious about developments. As I was walking back to my apartment after dinner, I spotted a familiar car in the visitor parking area, a black luxury sedan. Derek's car. My heart rate immediately increased. Sure enough, Derek was sitting on the bench outside my apartment door. He stood when he saw me approaching, his expression a mixture of anger and relief. "How did you find me?" I asked, stopping several feet away. "Frank's daughter. I called everyone we know trying to locate you." I nodded, unsurprised. It was a small community, and word travels. "I told you I was safe. I needed some space." Derek ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. He had done that same thing when frustrated since he was a teenager. "You can't just disappear like that, Dad. Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" I left a detailed letter explaining my decision. A letter? After all we've done for you, we deserved a conversation, not a letter left like some teenager running away from home. I unlocked my apartment door, then turned to face him. "Would you have listened in a conversation, or would you have tried to pressure me into signing that rental agreement?" He didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. "Can I come in?" he asked instead. I hesitated, then nodded. This conversation needed to happen eventually. Might as well be now. Derek followed me into the small apartment, looking around with barely concealed dismay. This is where you're living now? It's tiny. It's what I can afford while preserving my savings. And it's mine. Derek paced the small living room, clearly agitated. Dad, you completely overreacted. We were just trying to establish clear expectations. 1,500 might have been a starting point for negotiation. It was presented as a requirement, along with a formal lease for me to sign. That's not how family treats family, Derek. You don't understand the financial pressure we're under. The kids' school, the mortgage. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. Your financial obligations are significant. But making your father pay market rate rent when he's on a fixed income, after encouraging him to sell his paid-off home, is not the solution to those pressures. Derek stopped pacing and faced me. What about your cognitive state? Have you seen a doctor recently? This impulsive decision to move out. The implication that my decision must be the result of mental decline rather than a rational response to his actions was infuriating. My cognitive state is fine. My decision was not impulsive but carefully considered. And using concerns about my mental health as a manipulation tactic is beneath you. That stopped him short. For a moment, I saw shame flicker across his face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. Mom would have wanted us to stay together as a family. She would be heartbroken about this. The mention of Sarah sent a jolt of pain through me, but also clarity. Don't presume to tell me what your mother would have wanted. She valued dignity and mutual respect above all else in family relationships. She would have been disappointed by how you've handled this. Derek sat down heavily on my new recliner, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you want from me, Dad? I don't want anything from you. That's the point. I'm establishing my independence because the alternative was accepting a diminished place in your life, one defined by financial transaction rather than family bonds. We sat in silence for several minutes, the gulf between us feeling wider than the few feet separating us physically. Finally, Derek spoke again, his voice softer. What if we forget the rental agreement? You can move back in. No rent. I shook my head. It's not about the money, Derek. It's about how you view our relationship. That can't be fixed with a waived fee. It requires a fundamental shift in how we relate to each other as father and son, as family. He left shortly after. No resolution reached, but perhaps a better understanding of my position. As I locked the door behind him, I felt both drained and strengthened. Standing my ground had been difficult but necessary. Over the next week, the calls and texts gradually decreased. I maintained contact with Emma and Jason directly, calling them every couple of days to check in. Amanda's parents made another attempt at mediation, which I politely declined. Derek sent a few more messages, alternating between attempts at reconciliation and expressions of frustration at my stubbornness. Through it all, I focused on establishing my new life. I joined a coffee group at the community center that met 3 times a week. I helped another resident repair a broken cabinet door, which led to requests for other small carpentry jobs. I started walking daily around the complex's perimeter path, gradually meeting more neighbors. It wasn't the life I had envisioned when I sold my house, but it was becoming a life I could embrace. One where my worth wasn't measured by my financial contribution but by who I was as a person. As weeks turned into months, I gradually settled into my new life at Pine Grove Senior Living. What had begun as a refuge from a painful situation slowly transformed into a genuine home. My small apartment took on my personality, with the few treasured items I had brought and new touches acquired along the way. A hand-woven throw from the craft fair draped over my recliner, a set of carved wooden coasters I made in the community workshop, photos of my grandchildren in simple frames I constructed myself. The healing process unfolded in unexpected ways. The community center became a cornerstone of my new life. After helping a neighbor with a broken chair, word spread about my carpentry skills, and soon I was fielding regular requests for small repairs and projects. The center director, Marion, approached me about starting a woodworking class for interested residents. Nothing fancy, she said. Just basics for people who want to learn. We have the tools, but no one qualified to teach. Teaching had never been something I considered, but the idea appealed to me. We started with 6 participants, meeting twice weekly in the workshop. Watching the pride on 72-year-old Barbara's face when she completed her first birdhouse was unexpectedly fulfilling. The classes gave structure to my days and connected me with people who valued what I could offer. I also reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with over the years. Frank and Linda regularly included me in their family gatherings. My former coworker Jim, hearing of my move, reached out and we resumed our chess games, a tradition we had abandoned when I moved to Derek's. These renewed connections reminded me that family extends beyond blood relations. The relationship with Derek and his family remained complicated. After that initial confrontation in my apartment, we had maintained a strained distance. I spoke regularly with Emma and Jason by phone, but interactions with Derek were limited to brief, awkward exchanges when he dropped the children off for occasional visits. 3 months after my move, I agreed to meet Derek at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. It was time to attempt a more meaningful conversation now that raw emotions had settled somewhat. Derek arrived looking tired, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. We ordered coffee and sat at a corner table, the awkwardness between us palpable. "You look well, Dad," he said after a moment. "The apartment working out okay?" "It is," I replied. "I'm teaching a woodworking class now at the community center." Derek nodded, turning his coffee cup in circles. "The kids miss you. They ask about you all the time. I miss them too. They're welcome to visit more often. You and Amanda as well." He looked up sharply. "Really?" I thought. "I've never wanted distance from my family, Derek. I just couldn't accept the terms you were offering." Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I handled everything badly. Amanda and I were stressed about finances. Her business had a downturn, and I was worried about the kids' college funds. We saw your house sale as a potential solution to some of our problems. You should have been honest about that from the beginning. Would you have helped if I had just asked directly?" The question hung between us. Would I have? Perhaps, though not to the extent they had hoped. But being manipulated into it had broken something fundamental in our relationship. "I might have," I answered honestly, "but we'll never know because you chose not to ask. Instead, you tried to maneuver me into a situation where I had little choice." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about what that says about me, about the example I'm setting for my kids." His voice cracked slightly. "When did money become more important than family to me?" It was the first genuine moment of self-reflection I had seen from him since this all began. Not excuses or justifications, but a real questioning of his own values. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. "We all lose our way sometimes," I said gently. "The important thing is recognizing when we've strayed from who we want to be." Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering difficult territory but with a new openness. Derek acknowledged the hurt his actions had caused. I admitted that my abrupt departure had been painful for everyone, especially the children. We didn't resolve everything, but we established a foundation for moving forward. As we were preparing to leave, Derek asked tentatively, "Would you consider moving back in? No rent, no conditions, just family." I shook my head. "That chapter is closed, Derek. I've built a new life that works for me. But that doesn't mean we can't rebuild our relationship from where we are now." He nodded, disappointment evident, but acceptance too. "I understand. Can we at least have regular family dinners? Maybe every Sunday?" "I'd like that," I agreed. Over the next few months, we established new patterns of interaction. Sunday dinners at my apartment or sometimes at a restaurant midway between our homes. Occasional weekends where the grandchildren stayed with me. Derek and I slowly rebuilt trust. Though the ease we once shared remained elusive, Amanda took longer to come around. Her pride had been wounded, and she struggled to admit her role in the situation. Eventually, though, she too acknowledged that their approach had been misguided. "We were looking at everything through a financial planning lens," she admitted during one Sunday dinner. "We forgot that some things can't be quantified on a spreadsheet. The most profound lessons, though, were internal. Through this painful experience, I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. The courage to start over at 68. The resilience to build a new community. the wisdom to establish boundaries without burning bridges. I began volunteering at a local high school, teaching basic carpentry skills to students in the vocational program. Many came from challenging backgrounds and found solace in creating something tangible with their hands, just as I always had. One boy, Anthony, reminded me of Derek at that age, eager to learn and quick to master new techniques. Working with these young people gave me a sense of purpose I had been missing. My relationship with my grandchildren evolved in unexpected ways. Without the daily contact, our time together became more intentional, more valued. Emma, now 15, confided in me about her hopes for college and career in a way she might not have in the previous arrangement. Jason sought my advice about a woodworking merit badge for Boy Scouts. Our connections deepened despite the physical distance. 1 year after my abrupt departure from Derek's home, we gathered in my apartment to celebrate my 69th birthday. The small space was crowded with Derek and his family, Frank and Linda, and several of my new friends from Pine Grove. As I looked around at these people from different chapters of my life now brought together, I felt a profound gratitude. The crisis that had seemed so devastating had ultimately led to something precious, a clearer understanding of my own worth. Independent of what I could financially contribute to others, I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity, to establish healthy boundaries, to begin again. Before we cut the cake, Derek said, raising his glass, I want to toast my dad. This year hasn't been easy for any of us, but you taught me an important lesson about what really matters, about integrity and self-respect. I'm proud to be your son. Tears pricked my eyes as glasses were raised around the room. The journey had been painful, but the destination, this moment of genuine connection and mutual respect, made it worthwhile. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to preserve your dignity, even when it meant stepping away from people you love? Or maybe you have experienced family members trying to take advantage of your generosity. I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences that might help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember that it is never too late to stand up for yourself with love and integrity. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth in all your relationships.